Welcome to a special To Be More series on violence in Baltimore. I'm your host, TJ Smith. As part of this series, you've heard from those impacted by violence, along with those in leadership tasked with making changes our city so desperately needs. We want to do a deeper dive into the complicated process of addressing the epidemic of city violence. What are we getting right? How do we expand it? What does our future look like as these plans continue to be implemented? And today, as we continue this series, I'm pleased to be joined by now State's Attorney-elect, Ivan Bates. Thank you, Mr. State's Attorney, for joining us.
Thank you for having me, TJ. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, this is the first time I get to call you State's Attorney-elect. You'll be sworn in a number of weeks, and then it's yours. It's yours. It's no longer about the people that you've run against in the past. It's your baby. And now it'll be up to you to address some of this complicated process. How does that feel, first of all, that it's yours? The people of Baltimore have put the trust of that office in you.
Well, I did feel pretty good until you made it that way. I'm really humbled to be in this position. You know, I look back at my career, the things I've done from prosecuting to being a defense attorney to arguing all types of cases all around the country. To own my own law firm, and now to know that I'll be, tasked by the citizens to do this next job, the role of state's attorney, being the chief law enforcement officer, is humbling, but I recognize it's a big job and that I have a lot of work to do.
What should people expect to see and feel? Because we know that the perception of crime is a big one. It sometimes when the numbers are low, people still don't feel safe. But what should people see and feel differently about this state's attorney's office?
Well, we want to be as transparent as possible, but we're about relationships. I cannot do the job because it's not about me, it's about we. So if I don't rebuild the relationship, the trust with the police department, I will never be successful. That office will never be successful. If I can't go ahead and train the attorneys that are there, and some really good young attorneys, and motivate the senior attorneys and get everybody on the same page, we won't be successful. So what people can see as a state's attorney is going to work hard, state's attorney that believes in relationships, and state's attorney that's going to work for the citizens.
Yeah, a lot of this today is going to focus on moving forward, but I have to bring up a lot of what people have asked about this position, and your soon-to-be predecessor seemed to operate in a bit of an activism approach where there were certain things that she just didn't want to prosecute, and she made that her rule. And it might have conflicted with the law, but that was the stance she took. What type of philosophy will the Bates administration of the state's attorney's office have?
Well, I'm a big believer if it's the laws on the book, then it's my job to enforce that particular law. However, I don't make the arrest. That's what the police do. However, I am here to enforce it. For instance, those low-level offenses that the current incumbent has decided that they wouldn't prosecute, it's not about prosecuting and putting people in jail, it's about holding people accountable. And so if a police officer comes up upon a dice game, and do they want to make the arrest? Well, maybe one of the individuals who's at the dice game has a warrant for their arrest. Then that police officer makes that decision, that determination. I'm not on the streets. But if they want to give a warning to say we can't do this because it's in front of Miss Johnson's house, what we don't see is Miss Johnson's afraid to come outside on her own stoop where she used to want to sit there, but they're shooting dice, they're smoking weed, she has emphysema, so many things. Then I know the police are the ones who make those decisions out there because that's the snapshot of where that officer is. If they decide it's a citation, we're more than happy to deal with that. But if they decide that it's a person they've spoken to 6, 7 times and they still haven't gotten it and they feel they need to make the arrest, then we're here to support the police in doing that.
So I tell you, you like me have walked the streets and seen people like Miss Johnson who have complained endlessly about the people loitering, about the people, shooting dice in front of the house. And now, of course, marijuana passed on the ballot, so there's going to be some recreational marijuana that's going to be legal. But let's even take marijuana off the table. The things like loitering in front of a vacant house, drinking alcohol in front of a stoop, doing things that are still technically illegal. And people that are not, they don't want to speak up, but they do want that law enforced, and it hasn't been. Do you think that has played a role in some of the lawlessness that we've seen over the past number of years in Baltimore?
Oh, I know it has, without a doubt. You know, for the past 20 years, I've been a criminal defense attorney, and I know the way that my clients viewed the law 20 years ago, and I know the way that many of them view it now. I think they'd just gotten to the point where, some individuals felt they could just do whatever they wanted to, that there were no consequences for their actions. I think when you tell individuals, you tell the community what we're not going to do, then they're feeling like, oh, I can do what I want. There was a lot of confusion when the current incumbent said, the current state's attorney said, we will not prosecute attempt distribution. So the drug dealer heard, oh, they're not going to prosecute distribution. They don't know the difference between attempt and distribution. That's a legal term that most people don't understand or know. So they felt it was okay to sell drugs. And then when you say we're not going to prosecute marijuana, and you don't give a possession, but you don't give an amount, what is the amount? The new law that passed, it talks about an amount, and it also says you have to be 21 or above to possess a small amount of marijuana for personal usage. And so what does that look like? And so, I think when you don't tell the public and you're clear about what the law is, if the law is you can't do it, we will hold you accountable. It's as clear as it can possibly be.
Yeah, well, it sounds to me like you want the officers to have the tools in the toolbox. I know the word discretionary is something that has become scary to some, but the officers have a responsibility to make sure what they do is constitutional and appropriate in a well-written report. Let's clear something up so people don't get lost in the sauce here.
Okay.
We're not talking about mass incarceration for low-level crimes, are we?
No, not at all. One of the things you find out is that an individual may just need to do community service. We're not trying to even give them criminal records. It could just be as simple as a citation. They show up for court. We explain to them that they cannot be on that corner, what's going on, and that, hey, we'll give you 5 hours of community service. At that moment in time, that person's being held accountable for their action, and the case is over. It's done. They're not involved in the criminal justice system at all, but what it's saying is that we will hold you accountable. You're pretty much maybe a warning. The officer can give warnings, but for the individual that's out there on the corner day in and day out, that officer sees them on their beat, that officer knows the individuals that are potentially breaking the law to do criminal activity, an individual that may be breaking the law and they don't necessarily understand what's going on in the regard that, I'm hanging out here, but I'm not doing anything illegal. I was just hanging out here. The officer says, hey, you can't be here. You can't hang here. By the way, Miss Johnson lives here and I'm getting calls. You want the citizens to feel comfortable calling the police when they have issues happen in their neighborhoods.
Yeah, and to be clear, these officers have the tools under this administration. The tools will be there if necessary. And, I think one thing that's been less talked about now is the tools are different today, where they can push a button on their chest, which is a body-worn camera, and it can document a lot of the encounter now that wouldn't have been documented 10 years ago when you saw a lot more low-level offenses being prosecuted, and you might be able to see what was being caused. So hopefully that helps when this comes up in the news and people talk about it. So I'm sure the officers will be happy, but more importantly, Ms. Johnson and some of these people that like to sit on their stoop will be happy to know that you can't just meander on my stoop because trespassing isn't being prosecuted.
Well, exactly. We all grew up with laws and rules, and we have to follow the rules. Look, I have a 6-year-old daughter. You have a young son as well, and there are rules in your household that your children must follow. And so for me, we grew up with rules. We're raising our children with rules, so why don't the rules apply to the rest of society?
Oh, well, what a segue. And honestly, I wish that I was talking about guns first, and I should be talking about guns first, but it seems like we can't stop talking about squeegee people. It's a pain in the butt issue in the city of Baltimore. And recently, the mayor's office released some details of the squeegee collaboration recommendations, one of which is they're going to pay squeegee people not to go out on the corner. I already spoke with the mayor and the police commissioner, and had a little bit of a back and forth with them about the constitutionality of squeegeeing in the roadway, and I let them know that they're part of the executive branch, and the judicial branch, which you're a part of, is who actually interprets the law. Is it legal or not for people to get into the street and approach your car and squeegee your car without permission?
See, based on what you said, walking into the street and approaching the car is illegal. The case that a lot of people like to talk about is named Reed. It came out of the United States Supreme Court. And what it really basically says is that if you're peacefully standing on the corner and it's not private, it's public, and say you're just standing there, you could just be holding a sign, but you're not going in and out of traffic, then that within itself is legal. Once an individual, whether it's a squeegee worker, whether it's a panhandler, anybody's going into the street and they're approaching a vehicle, where they're just walking in and out of traffic, that within itself is illegal. There are laws and traffic code says you cannot do that. You have trespass, you cannot do that. But that's illegal. Think about it. It's dangerous for the squeegee worker or the aggressive panhandler, and it's also dangerous to the driver, the motorist, because when one motorist is stopped in the roadway, then another motorist is coming. Let's say you're coming into the city, and then what happens? You're not paying attention, and then all of a sudden this vehicle stops. Boom, you could have an accident. So that is definitely not legal.
Yeah, I've seen the situations where the light's been green and the person stopped. And I hear there's going to be driver accountability as part of this recommendations as well. It just seems like we don't want to address this issue, and there is a genuine lack of accountability. And I think the issue that the people who are, quote, against squeegeeing have is very simple. If I say no, move on. And it would be a non-issue, in my opinion, if it were an aggressive act. And I think that's where it's gotten muddy. What have you heard from people as you've walked these streets and talked about it, and this has been an issue that's come up?
Well, the one thing I've been saying from day one is that the squeegee workers, the aggressive panhandlers, they must go. And that when I say that, people are very excited about that. Everybody from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds. I was Huber Memorial on Sunday. And
That's Pastor P.M. Smith,
Pastor
right?
P.M. Smith,
Yes.
and I brought this issue up. And that was the loudest applause I received. And that's a predominantly African-American church in the inner city. And what it says is that people are sick and tired. They do not want to be approached in their vehicles. Remember, we're coming out of a pandemic. So some of that personal space means a lot more to people now than it did back then. And that, look, without a doubt, squeegee workers have to go. The mayor and I have had numerous conversations. I believe the mayor does have a plan that will address that, specifically in those main targeted areas. I know it's a pilot program. How we get from point A to point B, that's not really my concern. My concern is the end result, and the end result must be that they cannot be in those specific areas. And what can we do for the pilot program? And my hope and goal is eventually the entire city we will not be having squeegee workers. That's my hope and goal in the future.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And, some of us get, bastardized if we say no squeegeeing. It doesn't mean lock them up. And I know after having extensive conversations and hearing you speak on it, you don't endorse arresting them. They have a way out. It is not police, go lock them up. It's you have to leave the corner. Here are some opportunities for you. You still endorse that, right?
Oh, 1,000%. I think the mayor has the resources to give the wraparound services, the job training, to give GED training to a number of these young individuals. Also, you want to have a number of young individuals who are still school age to be back in school at 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 11 o'clock. An 11-year-old should not be on the corner, of Conaway Street squeegeeing anybody's vehicle. They need to be in school. And so there are a lot of problems, a lot of issues. I think one of the things that to me is very clear, the role of the state's attorney. My role is not the social worker wraparound service. That's not my role. That's not my job. The mayor is in that position to do that. The mayor has those resources. However, my role is to enforce the law and the rules. I don't really care what the law is. I don't make the laws. It's my job to enforce them, and that is what I must do. Now, I do have the discretion working with the police department to say, hey, let's hopefully not arrest them unless we've gotten to that point. Let's give warnings. Let's give a citation, all those things before you get to an arrest. because you don't want those individuals to be in the criminal justice system in any way, shape, form, or fashion. You just want them to not be on that corner, but to have a job, a sustainable job and a career that they can really focus on basically having a quality of life.
Yeah, which is important. And you have a little girl, I have a little boy, and we want both of them to understand that no means no.
Yes.
And I do believe this has gotten out of control because some don't understand that no means no, and we have to enforce accountability, and hopefully we see some results soon, whether it's a combination of all of these things, what have you, but I know people want enforcement across the board, and it's some cells of people that think that the squeegeeing on the corner is okay, and I don't think that's good for our young black kids in particular, who are the main ones on the corner. So
no, I agree. I really feel that, look, I went to Howard University. We talked about the talented 10th, wanting better for ourselves, lifting as we climb, all those positive things. I don't necessarily see long-term employment opportunities for squeegee workers. And I think we really have to say, hey, you're a great young leader. We need to put you in a position so that you can succeed in standing out here in the elements, rain, or basically not a squeegee when it's raining. Hopefully you're not.
Oh, they
But,
are. They are. That's
anytime.
happened to me multiple
Yeah.
times. It's ridiculous.
It is. We don't want them out there because they need to understand we want better for them, and they need to want better for themselves.
Yeah.
And we recognize that many of you are coming from a difficult life and a hard life, but that doesn't mean that we still don't want better for you, so that then you can really have that job to get you and your family and take you out of the position that you are in right now. A lot of times I do understand poverty. We don't criminalize poverty. We're not doing that. What we're doing is saying we want and expect better for you, and we're here to help you get to that next level.
Yeah, and I think there are ways to help them express their creativity better. I've said before, and I hope I'm not going to give any more ideas to create even more of a problem, but cleaning my rims and putting Armor All on my tires and more of that Daytona 500 style would probably be more advantageous to the workers on the corner than washing my windshield. Just expand the level of creativity, but the washing of the windshield, and I see it happen every single day where someone's waving them off and they still do it no matter what. And that's where these confrontations happen. And obviously you're going to inherit the big case with Timothy Reynolds coming up. So I know you have to look over and deal with that. But we have to go into something more serious than squeegee people, and not that it isn't serious because they do have a lot of issues that need to be addressed, but the guns. The people with the guns that are causing a lot of the violence in this city. Ghost guns are a big thing. I asked the police commissioner and the mayor about this. I know the mayor has been against mandatory sentencing. I feel like there's some happy medium where that mandatory sentence is necessary when there's a level of intent. If you have specifically got the pieces to put together a Polymer 80, or you've acquired a Polymer 80 type gun, that you did it specifically to evade detection. Where do you stand with something like that?
Well, I'm always not really a big proponent of mandatory sentences. However, I do. And the only reason I say that is because I think there should be a little discretion somewhere. But I also do believe that, for instance, as the incoming state's attorney, that if you have a prior felony and you have a handgun, you're eligible for 5 years without the possibility of parole. See, as a prosecutor, I have the discretion to call or not call that. Now, in most cases, I do plan on calling that. But what about the person who has a felony from, say, 1965? And let's say they grab their son's book bag as opposed to their book bag, and they weren't paying attention. They get stopped by the police, and the police find a handgun in that book bag, and they're on their way to work. There needs to be some discretion in that moment in time, because I can say, okay, this man is working. The convictions from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, even the 90s. And we can clearly see, based on what's going on, yes, an illegal handgun, but we can see the paperwork that has his son's name on it and everything. I want to be able to have discretion with those cases, so that's why I talk about not necessarily liking the automatic mandatory minimums, but I would support law that allow the prosecution to call the mandatory minimum on those types of cases. Because let's say the police are doing a sting operation, and the pack there, they have a UPS individual going on, and they know the mail is coming with a ghost gun, and they follow the ghost gun to the house, and once it's delivered, they make the arrest, and only to find out that, oh my God forbid, this person didn't order the ghost gun, someone else sent it to the house hoping to try to pick it up at a later time. And so, those types of cases, if it's a mandatory, there's no wiggle room. However, it allows me, if there's a component to the law that makes allowable that the state can invoke the mandatory, I can definitely support that.
Yeah, and you just explained it where it made a world of sense to me, because those scenarios do happen. I've seen them for myself. And those are the people who should not be subjected to that type of mandatory sentence, of course. But then we have the ones who are the habitual offenders, who seem to always evade jail time. Yeah. I mean, I've seen people get jail time on much less of offenses, but the gun offender consistently gets out. Do you see yourself, and I think you just mentioned it, using the kicker of the mandatory sentencing that we do have, but it just seems like it's not used as much? The judicial discretion seems to err on the side of letting them out.
Well, I ran on, if you have a legal handgun, you can go to jail, first-time offender. I don't care where you are, who you are. And that sounds good, but once you really start giving that time, people are going to be very angry and upset. And so this is a first-time gun offender. So technically, let's say you could be a student at Morgan, or you could be a student at Johns Hopkins. Both you, one could be captain of the basketball team, next could be captain of the lacrosse team, and you just both be in a car, and you have a book bag, and you have a legal handgun. Both of them will ask for jail time of a year on both of them. I recognize that in the middle of college, they're doing that great things, but unfortunately, you made a decision to carry an illegal handgun. And so that's why I do believe the law must apply to everyone across the board. But in terms of the felons, when you call the minimum mandatory, that gets people's attention. They have to make a decision. Oftentimes you hear the phrase, I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. If that's how you feel, then I understand that. Then you now understand the law and the rule. And the rule is when those 12 say guilty, you're going to go to jail a minimum of 5 years without the possibility of parole. Keep in mind, the law says 15 years, the first 5 without the possibility of parole. So if you're a habitual offender, don't expect the 5 without. You should expect the 15. And on 15, you'll probably do about 8 or 9. So you have to be very serious if that's how you really feel. At the end of the day, my focus is people leave your guns, illegal guns, at home.
Yeah. And
register them and get your license.
Right. And, people listen to what you say. They will listen to what the leaders in the city say. And they know policy. And as someone who used to drive to Virginia all the time, or even further south, we knew that the Virginia State Troopers would give their mama a ticket. So we slowed down when we went through that, because there were repercussions for our actions. And you corrected your behavior as a result. So hopefully over time, if these policies do get instituted and people are made examples out of, people correct that behavior, which in turn drops the murder rate. That's what our goal is,
yes.
Obviously, with this. So I'm going to switch gears a bit and ask you about a couple of open cases, because we can obviously talk about the gun issue all day. But we have a couple of open cases that are big headlines in the city that some you've talked about, some you haven't maybe. But Heyman Lee, we know, is in the news right now. Where do you stand on that case, the Adnan Syed case?
Well, I can't really go into those cases, but what I can say is I think that the Court of Special Appeals will take up the issue, specifically the victim notification. I think it's extremely important. Based on what I've seen in the media, I do have some questions as to what the real notification was. I do believe that victims and their family especially murder victims, that they need to be notified when the state is about to do something as serious as dismissing, no processing, and throwing out a prior murder conviction. The family specifically, in this case, has lived for 24 years believing one person was responsible for the death of their daughter. And I think a lot of times just bringing them in, having that communication, you may not agree, the victim, the family may not agree, but at least they've now understood your position. And so to me, that is very important. And I think it's an important case to be heard.
All right. And Sean Suter, that case, of course, a lot of controversy. 2017. It's now 2022, and we're recording this in November of 2022, 5-year anniversary of his death. It's a murder. It's been ruled a murder.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on that?
You know, I'm not going to say conflicted, but I knew Sean. You know, I knew him as an officer. I knew him as a good officer. I had a number of homicides against him. His attorney, Jeremy Eldridge, a good friend of mine, one of my best friends. And so we'd had a lot of conversation and dialogue. For me, I saw the ME said it was a murder, and I still believe it's a murder. I know what other people may say, but I know what I feel, and I know how I look at it. And, you know, I've seen the TV shows, and I've heard what people have said and all of that, but I still see it the way that I see it, and yes, I still do view it as a murder. That's what the medical examiner says, and until it says something different, legally, that's how I'm interpreting it.
Yeah, there have been multiple documentaries done on that case. There have been multiple theories, and then, of course, you tie in something that you were very involved in, and that's the Gun Trace Task Force. Specifically, Wayne Jenkins, you were referenced in the mini-series, We Own This City. And had a hand in taking down Wayne Jenkins. And wanted to bring that point up before I get into one more open case as well, because some people ask, you were a defense attorney, you were a prosecutor, but you defended an officer with the Freddie Gray situation in Baltimore. And how can you possibly hold officers accountable? As a programming note, people can go back and listen to our podcast we did when you were running. It's here on the BMore website as well. And we talked a bit about this at the time. Talk about those two things, how you can defend an officer who you believe in their innocence, and you can go after an officer who you believe is doing everything wrong with their badge.
You know, one of the beauties of the law is that, you know, it's pretty much black or white. That's how I looked at it. My job as a prosecutor is to hold people accountable for their actions. So I look at the law, I look at the facts, and how the facts relate to the law. And if I feel that an individual has broken the law, then I have the opportunity to pursue that. And so I'm still looking to see what the facts say. As a defense attorney, I'm looking to see what the facts say and understanding what the law says and why the state may have charged an individual. And so it's still the same job, I'm just on different teams. You know, it's no different than saying one day you're playing for the Steelers, the next day you're playing for the Ravens. You know, you're still playing football. With me having been on both sides, I feel that I'm better equipped to do the job. I've seen good individuals who have made terrible mistakes be charged, and they should have. But I've seen bad individuals who've done a number of terrible things get charged, and they should not have. So I think it's imperative, having been on both sides, to understand that the law needs to be fair and treat everybody the same. It doesn't matter if you wear blue. It doesn't matter if you're an African American or Caucasian. The law must treat everybody the same. Look at the facts, and if an individual broke the law based on the facts, then that individual should be held accountable. And so, having been on both sides, I really understand the seriousness of putting an individual in handcuffs, of charging an individual, what it does to their life. But I also understand what not charging an individual who's murdered a loved one or done something or terrorizing a neighborhood, what it does to that neighborhood, and not holding individuals accountable.
And with that, what's your relationship like with Anthony Brown? He's the incoming Attorney General, and they have a new office of the Attorney General that handles police-involved shootings or police-involved in-custody deaths. So you all should be working well together on that particular area, police oversight, but just in general on cases.
Well, one of the good things is that, the Attorney General, soon to be, Anthony Brown, former still congressman, we have a really good relationship. Known him for a while, good communication, saw him on the campaign trail, have talked to him numerous times. That will be a seamless transition in terms of working together. Even the same thing I can say with the U.S. Attorney, and I can say the same thing with our incoming governor. It's incumbent upon me and even the mayor. It's incumbent upon me as a state's attorney to have a good working relationship with all the leaders so that I can bring the best to Baltimore.
Well, that's important. Again, speaking on behalf of some citizens that I've run across, they really don't care about you guys' personal relationships behind the scenes. They want action. They want action. So y'all better cheers it up in front of the cameras and go out there and get action. Argue behind the scenes. No one cares. They want action. Another case that has gotten a cult-like following here in Baltimore, and you weighed in on it, but I would ask, similar to the Heyman Lee case, is it something that you're going to wait to really make a decision on until you get in and talk to the prosecutor and talk to the family of the victim? And that's the Keith Davis Jr. case. Or is it different specifically because of the amount of times going to trial versus the evidence?
Well, it's an ongoing case. I'm about to be the state's attorney. I really can't comment. But what I will say is that I'm very concerned about the due process portion of that case. Our criminal justice system doesn't work, and people don't believe in it unless it's fair. So, I will look at things, but I've made my feelings very known. But I have feelings that are there other cases where I have due process cares and concerns. So it's not just about Keith Davis Jr., but it's about making sure that the state's attorney's office has not violated and is not in a position to violate the due process rights of individuals charged.
Right. Yeah. And again, Kevin Jones, I believe, is the victim in that case. And, their family for the last several years has a belief that this is the person that killed their loved one. So similar in that Adnan Syed case. But it is very important to make sure the right person is spending time in jail for murder of an individual. So now Dr. Fowler, the former medical examiner, he got himself into some hot water testifying in the George Floyd case. That's caused a review of a ton of his cases here in Baltimore, including a lot of police-involved shootings. Have you looked at any of those cases yet, or have you done a peripheral view of the cases that he's been involved in, and what impact do you think that might have on your term?
Well, I haven't, but I can tell you this. A few months ago, my law partner actually tried a case where it wasn't just Dr. Fowler. There was another medical examiner who, I want to say the last name's Muhammad, but don't quote me on that, who worked very close with Dr. Fowler. And I know that my law partner brought that issue up to the court, and the court took notice, but they didn't look at or do anything one way or another. So I am going to be concerned about that to see what's going on. I want to know how many cases there are. Now, where I am now, no, I haven't had that opportunity. But once I get in the office, those are things that I will care about, that I do care about. And it's not just Dr. Fowler, but it's also any and all medical doctors that have worked with Dr. Fowler as well. Because if this is the chief medical examiner, and say you are a medical examiner, you're working with Dr. Fowler, then your case and your work now could potentially come into question. So I want to pull those cases to the side to review them as quickly as possible, as opposed to waiting for the court and what the court will say.
Yeah, man, just for people listening, Dr. Fowler was the medical examiner in Baltimore for many years. He testified in the murder case of George Floyd and brought about a lot of questions about his work here in Baltimore that is being reviewed now. And so it could have a big impact on some cases here. Not necessarily, but possibly. So it's just something to follow that the state's attorney is definitely going to have a hand in.
And one of the things, I'm not saying Dr. Fowler or any of the medical examiners have done anything wrong whatsoever.
Right.
However, I think it is important to already have my eyes on the case to see it's something that's potentially an issue or a problem. I have never reviewed any of them. And I do recognize that, right now people are just going to look at them to figure out if there's a pattern or anything going on.
Don't you just love this? This is almost like your first day in the office where I'm just coming to you with a stack of cases and saying, hey, get familiar with all of this because this is what we're going to have to shove in your face. And this is what State's Attorney Ivan Bates is going to have to inherit. There are a lot of outstanding things that are going to carry over into his term that didn't start under his term. So he doesn't get sworn in until January. So there are things that are going to happen between now and January that are going to end during his term. So we'll see that. The consent decree. What are your thoughts, your general thoughts on that? You've watched that occur. You've watched that happen as a defense attorney. You, again, through GTTF. Do you think we still need to be in it?
Ooh. That's difficult for me to say. I think that the department has made strides. Will I say that it's dealt with all its issues? I don't think anybody's ever dealt with all the issues. Do I think they've dealt with a number of issues? From what I can see, yes. I can't tell you whether or not I still think they need to be in it because I just think that that's something that the court, Judge Berdar, something that I think Ken Thompson, and something that I think the police commissioner, Harrison, they have a better grasp of what's going on in the BPD than I do in terms of do they still need to be in it. I'm really focused on training, because I think the better trained that an officer is, the better that case they can make, and it allows us to be able to have a better prosecution. With all of that, from what I can see and what I know, is one of the people who is an attorney who I've known for many years is now down doing the training down at BPD. So I think that it's definitely on the right path. But have they already reached and achieved their goals? I don't believe they have, but I don't know. Only they can answer that question.
Yeah. It seems like the judge was accosted by squeegee people. And it seemed like the judge said, hey, I didn't tell you to stop enforcing these laws. I said do it constitutionally.
Yes.
And how you do it is the issue. Just do it constitutionally. So it seems like the judge is on the side of you can enforce laws, enforce them constitutionally. So that seems to be really the back and forth here. I just wonder.
I think if you're a police officer, it's a little confusing because what do? On one hand, you have the prosecutor who's saying don't enforce them. On the other hand, you're having the police department that says, okay, you can, but if you enforce it and God forbid something happens to the individual who is never going to be prosecuted in the first place, should you really enforce it? I just think to be a police officer in Baltimore City during these last few years should have been, to me, extremely difficult and confusing. And so that's why when I come in, if the law's on the books, you have the opportunity to enforce it as you see fit, meaning that officer. I don't want to make it as simple as possible because I just think the way the system is set up, they have their job, I have my job. If we do our job constitutionally, then we could be fine.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. And one of the big, heavy, meaty things with the consent decree is training. And if officers write reports correctly, they do the job constitutionally and transition that to the reporting. That makes your job in the state's attorney's office much easier, obviously. And I brought that up with the police commissioner and the mayor that, I understand there might be a rule right now or whatever it is saying we don't want to enforce these lower level offenses or arrest squeegee people, for instance. But if the state's attorney is saying, I don't interpret the Constitution that way, the officers have every right to do it. And it's not an illegal arrest. So it could get quite interesting come January where they say, hey, we've given this person warnings. We've documented it on body worn camera. He told us where to go, how we can get there, and an alternate route to get there. And we've effected an arrest. I think the people of Baltimore are kind of looking for some actions to take place to try to get some semblance of law and order back.
Well, I do as well. I've had the conversation with the police commissioner and the mayor. I do believe that they both, all of us are on the same page in terms of, hey, if the law is on the book, the police have the discretion. But I can't speak for the police commissioner. I can't speak for the mayor. But I do recognize that everybody sees that crime is out of control in Baltimore City. We need to do something. I think one of the things also, the police were so afraid, like, oh, if I just make a mistake, I'm going to be instantly prosecuted. No, I know there's a difference between a mistake and doing something wrong criminally. You mentioned the Freddie Gray matter where I represented Sergeant Alicia White. I learned so much about police, the police culture, the general orders, how police are trained. And that is one of the things that made me like, wow, opened up my eyes on a whole nother level. And so when I saw the gun trace task force issue with Wayne Jenkins, I understood and went back to the general orders to realize, oh, the general orders just didn't apply to Wayne Jenkins.
Right.
And so he was definitely breaking the law.
Right.
I think having had that experience, I think it's important that the police recognize that I do understand the difference between a mistake and doing something that's criminal. And I will treat the police the same way I would want to treat anybody else, and that is treat people the way you want to be treated. Understand if there is a mistake, what's going on. You know, people even ask me about do not call lists and things like that. Yeah, I will have a do not call list, but the way I do it will be fair. The officers will understand what's going on. We'll make sure the officer understands why they would be placed on a do not call list. And if there's something that we can find that's a little different to say, hey, that's not really what happened. But we would also look at the body worn camera. We would also have that conversation with the police department so that officer and the police department understood our issue with that officer. I try to be as fair as possible to people.
That's all we can ask for. And speaking of the difference in things, juvenile crime, there's a huge difference, and adult crime even. You have drug addicts who are stealing and breaking into your house. They don't want to encounter you. They just want to grab something to get a quick fix. You have juveniles who want to steal a car and go for a joyride. But then you have the violent offenders. And we're going to speak specifically about juveniles. The juveniles carrying guns, the juveniles that will rip you out your car and carjack you with a gun. How are we going to deal with them? Because they're different. They're different than the kid that's going to run to the store with part of a flash mob even. They're different. They're groupthink kids. They do kid stuff. But the kid that's going to put a gun in your face and rip you out your car is different.
Well, they are. A lot of times you see there's an anger, a rage, sometimes a hopelessness. And so hopefully, you know, some of the programs they're going to have with the juvenile offenders will help. But I think in terms of a prosecution standpoint, I do understand, you know, the case from the Supreme Court, Alabama, talking about the development of juvenile and the brain and all of that. I really understand that, but I also understand that my job is to be the chief law enforcement officer and to protect the public. If juveniles are going to do adult actions and adult behavior, there should be adult consequences. What those consequences look like, well, we have to look and tailor it to the crime. Does that mean that, you know, the juvenile, let's say, has a handgun, first-time offense, 14 years of age, 15 years of age, no juvenile record, and they basically, with a group of guys, go out and, you know, carjack a person? Does that mean that juvenile stays in the adult system? I mean, actually, they have to be 16 or above. In the adult system, maybe, or maybe this juvenile is going to be awarded to the state and then maybe placed out of state. We have to look at so many factors. One of the things that happened about a year ago is the state of Maryland changed the law in terms of what the Department of Juvenile Services must give to the court and to the state and the defense in waiving juveniles. So we have to really have a better understanding what placements or programs are even available to the young juveniles in the criminal justice system, specifically on the juvenile side. So we'll really look at those from a different vantage point. That's something we didn't have in the past, where you just assume this program or that program. But to really have the Department of Juvenile Services now have to tell us what programs they're available to is important, because maybe the juveniles act is so heinous there are no programs that are available to them. It's incumbent upon me to have prosecutors that are dedicated to the juvenile system, in the juvenile system. In the past, juvenile system has been used as a training ground. I want prosecutors to understand who the children are, who the kids are, who the juveniles are, and who the young adults are within the juvenile system, so that we can better go ahead and know these are individuals that we're going to send to the adult system. These are individuals we think we can take a chance on. These are individuals that are so young that we need to give them so many wraparound services and also services that are family, because we can see where they're headed. And so that, to me, is a different approach to the juvenile system in some ways.
The juveniles, again, knowing the development, but the extremes of what they're judged on, they can't be judged as one group.
Yes.
Because that juvenile delinquency is one thing, but that violent crime is hurting people. It's hurting regular people, killing regular people.
And they will be held accountable. It's a slippery slope because, on one hand, a number of the kids are born in poverty they didn't ask for. A number of these kids didn't have a chance, and so some of them are in survival mode. And I get that. I really get that. But I also understand survival mode doesn't mean you hurt someone else. That you go out and intentionally do take another individual's life because you're angry, because you're upset. Because, quote unquote, your brain hasn't fully developed to that point. We have to hold you accountable based on your actions. Where does that mean and what does it mean? That's the difficult part, and that's why I'm really excited to know that to have the reports from the Department of Juvenile Service specifically look at these individuals and what programs, if any, that would help them with their concerns and their needs, that's important.
All right, one thing we kind of touched on, and I want to get into it real quick, is the customer service. I hate to use the word customer service, but that's what it is. Customer service for victims and witnesses. I hear this very consistently. When you become a victim, unfortunately, or a survivor, where especially with murder, people don't feel like they're getting the customer service they deserve, the communication that they deserve. How do you feel like you can improve upon that from your position as state's attorney? The different trial dates, the just simply retrieving the property of their loved one. It might not be in your house, but they might have moved over to the state's attorney's office now because there was an arrest in the case. So that's who the victim family has latched onto. How can we work better in concert? Because they don't care who owns it. They just need the stuff, and it can really alleviate some of the stress on the family.
Well, I think one of the things I need to have a better understanding of what the Victim Witness Division is doing in the State's Attorney's Office. I do hear that it's doing a good job, but I also hear that there are holes in that process. So having a better understanding of that. The next thing that to me is very important is making sure that we have the funding to expand the program, to make victims and witnesses feel as safe as possible. And that is also, as you said, the customer service. And do we need to hire additional support staff for the victims, for the witnesses? What is the mission that we're focused on? Is it just to go ahead and support them after they've testified, or support them from the time period they've been a victim throughout that entire process? Those are questions I really need to have a better understanding of. But what I can tell you, I've already reached out to Governor Hogan and said, hey, I did see and read how, GOCAP, the Mayor's Office of Crime, the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention has a different name now, Crime Prevention and Victims Services, I believe is the name. But reach out to them to say, I understand there were grants for victims, witnesses the state's attorney's office didn't receive. What can I do to receive those grants? What can I do to go ahead and bring the money in the office so that it can benefit the victims and witnesses? Let's be clear. We cannot win any cases if we don't have victims and or witnesses buy in, believing that we're going to support them and believing that we have their back. That is one of the most important aspects of my job, is to make victims and witnesses feel safe so they can come and tell the story about the crime that they're seeing happening in their neighborhood.
Yeah, you can steal the idea. We need a triad model of some sort where the police department and the state's attorney's office share the resources from the onset of a violent crime, especially a murder, where there is undoubtedly communication and constant communication with the families. I can say personally that my family had a pleasurable is not the best word, had a good experience with the victim witness advocates from the state's attorney's office when we unfortunately had to go through it. But I know many families who have had questionable experiences, not just from the state's attorney's side, from the police department side, for the unsolved cases. Yeah. Just getting that phone call of saying there's nothing new to report is a big deal to a family who's wondering if their case was forgotten about. So I know it means a lot to you and know it means a lot to the city. It's a big deal. So if we can communicate that better, I know it will mean a lot. And you mentioned something as we wrap up here about hiring that team. Has your phone been ringing off the hook since, Roya Hanna ran an incredible race and she graciously bowed out to clear the pathway for you. to basically win on general election night as a formality. Has your phone been ringing off the hook since you've been duly elected as the state's attorney?
It has. It's funny, we're sitting here and my phone keeps vibrating. But a lot of well wishes, a number of people do want to come back. It's incumbent that I really understand the budget, all the constraints, who's on grants, who's not on grants, all those fine little issues that we don't really think of. There are a lot of great lawyers out there who have been in the state's attorney's office. They have a lot to offer. But there are also a lot of really good young lawyers in that office as well. And so I'm really going to be focused on training, development, because I really, as I tell people, I think one of the things we need to do is maybe do it the Oriole way, meaning that we get a lot of the younger individuals who want to be prosecutors. I want to modernize the office and make the experience in terms of for the juror, make it an experience so that we use body camera footage in a way that we really never have. That I've watched them do it on the federal side, where they stop it, they blow it up, they have all different things. They can, little by little, every single scene, have the officer explain what they're seeing so the jury is like, oh my goodness, it's almost a movie. Those are types of cases, as a defense attorney, I hated because those are going to be quick guilties because it made the jury have no doubt what was going on because they could see it. I have to modernize the office. Once I'm able to do that, and then I also need to make sure that the lawyers who are there are trained properly on how to use that equipment, but they're also trained properly in knowing what they need to do as lawyers. They have the enthusiasm. I just have to go ahead and find the best way to bottle it, to work with them, to train them, and to give them the resources to be successful. So my phone's been ringing off the hook, but I just need to know a little bit more, and they'll find us out based on the transition, about all the holes in that office, positions need to be filled, and where I need to bring people back.
Well, a lot of people are wishing you well. I'll say depending on you, but also wishing you well. The transition is a process, and we're wishing you well because your best is our best, and we wish you the very best moving forward as you get sworn in after the new year. So thank you very much for giving us your time today to explain a bit of your philosophy moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thank you all for listening to us here on To Be More. Again, this is a special series. You can go back and watch the other series where we talked to the mayor of Baltimore and the police commissioner of the Baltimore Police Department. And we also spoke to two victims or two survivors who lost their children to the violence in Baltimore. And there are many other podcasts available here on the To Be More podcast series. So thank you very much. They're available where podcasts are located here on WMAR TV2 in Baltimore. Thank you very much, and we will see you next time. Take care.